I feel that the people around you will live to experience your vision of the new man, but it feels more like 100 years away before man in general will come to see and live your vision. Is this true?
It is true. Even if it happens in 100 years' time, it will be too soon. But the question is significant in a totally different way. It is not the realization of the vision, the coming of the new man, a new humanity. That will come in its own time. The more important thing is to be able to visualize it. Everything great that has happened in the world first has been an idea. Sometimes it took hundreds of years for it to become a reality. But the joy of having a vision, an insight into the future is immense. The people who are with me should rejoice that they can see a possibility of the old rotten world disappearing and a new, fresh human being taking its place. Just the vision will change you at least, will shift your being from the past to the future. In a certain way, you will start living the new man who has not come yet. You will start living the new man in a small ways. And each moment of that living will be a blessing. And as you become acquainted within yourself of the explosion of the new and the destruction of the old, you are changing. You are going through a revolution. I am interested in you. Who cares about what is going to happen after 100 years? Something must be happening. But it is not our business. And when I talk about the new man, I am really talking about you to become aware of the possibility, because that very awareness will change you. I am not interested in future. I am simply interested in the immediate present. Future will go on. For eternity. But if your mind can be cleaned of the past rubbish, and if you can see the far away rising sun, I am not interested in the sun. I am interested in your vision, in your capacity to see, in your understanding, in your hope that it is possible. That very hope will become a seed in you. The new man will come whenever it has to come. But the new vision can come right now. And with the new vision, you participate in a subtle way with the man who has not come yet, with the humanity who's still in the womb. You start having a synchronicity, a certain relationship. Your roots from the past start dropping, and you start growing your roots into the future. But my interest, I repeat, is basically in you. Neither I am interested in the past nor in the future. I talk about the past so that you can get rid of it. I talk about the future so that you can remain open to it. But you are the point of my emphasis.
I love to hear you speak about nirvana. The word itself is still unpolluted and so wondrous. On the other hand, I noticed the other week that we now have enlightened insurance policies.
This must be Kavisha. Because the question can come only from California. In California, you have enlightened insurance policy. In California, everything is possible. But there is no insurance. No guarantee. For enlightenment. You have to earn it. you have to deserve it. Nobody can give it to you. It is not a commodity. And I can see why the word nirvana thrills you into ecstasies. It is certainly one of the words which is unpolluted. There is a reason why it remained unpolluted. The first reason that it remained unpolluted was its meaning. Unless you have come to a deep understanding of yourself and existence, the word nirvana will create fear in you. It is a negative word. Literally it means blowing off the candle. Gautam Buddha used the word for the ultimate state of consciousness. He could have chosen some positive word. And in India, there were many positive words for it. Moksha, freedom, liberation. Kaivalya, aloneness, absolute aloneness. Brahmanubhav, the experience of the ultimate. But he chose a strange word. Which has never been used in spiritual contexts. Blowing off the candle. How can you relate it with a spiritual experience? But Buddha says your so-called self is nothing but a flame. And it is being kept burning through your desires. When all desires disappear, the candle has disappeared. Now the flame cannot exist anymore. The flame also disappears. Disappears into the vast universe, leaving no trace behind it. You cannot find it again. It is there, but it is gone forever from any identity, from any limitation. Hence he chose the word nirvana rather than realization, because realization still can give you some egoistic superiority, that you are a realized person, that you are a liberated being, that you are enlightened, that you are illuminated, that you have found it. But you remain. And Buddha is saying, you are lost. Who is going to find it? You disperse. You are only a combination. Now each element goes to its original source. The identity of the individual is no more. Yes, you will exist as the universe. So he avoided any positive word. Knowing human tendency, because each positive word can give you a feeling of ego. No negative word can do that. That's why it remains unpolluted. You cannot pollute something which is not. And people were very much afraid to use the word with a deep inner trembling. Nirvana. Thousands of times Buddha was asked, that your word nirvana does not create in us an excitement, does not create in us a desire to achieve it. The ultimate truth, the self-realization, the realization of God, all those create a desire, a great desire. Your word creates no desire. And Buddha said again and again, that is the beauty of the word. All those words which create desire in you are not going to help you, because desire itself is the root cause of your misery. Longing for something is your tension. Nirvana makes you absolutely free from tension. There is nothing to desire. On the contrary, you have to prepare yourself to accept a dissolution. In dissolution, you cannot claim the ego. Hence, the world remains unpolluted. No other world has remained unpolluted. Its negativity is the reason. And only a great master can contribute to humanity something which even if you want, you cannot pollute it. "25 centuries, but there is no way. Nirvana is going to dissolve you. You cannot do anything to Nirvana. It is certainly the purest word. Even its sound, whether you understand the meaning or not, is soothing, gives a deep serenity and silence, which no other word, God realization, the absolute, the ultimate, no other word gives that feeling of silence. The moment you hear the word Nirvana, it seems as if time has stopped. As if there is nowhere to go. In this very moment you can melt, dissolve, disappear without any trace behind.
The anecdote you told about Mullah Nasruddin and the sack of sugar pinpointed the reason for my occasional resistance to being told what to do. When Nasruddin's father saw what was happening to the sugar, he need only have made his son aware of it without providing a solution. Having had the situation pointed out to him, the mullah, if he had any intelligence, could have seen what was needed to be done and acted accordingly. But his father did not allow him the chance to think it out for himself.
The story is a simple way of saying very complex and complicated things. As far as the story is concerned, you are right. The father could have explained. There was no need for any order and no need for obedience or disobedience. But it is a story. In actual life, there are things particularly for example, God or the soul or the paradise, the temple, the worship, the prayer to an unknown God. There is no way to explain. The Father cannot explain God. He himself does not know. He has been told, he accepted it, and he has believed it. Now it is time for him to tell to the Son. How he can explain. And that's where I come in the story. Your whole society and the mind of your society is based on things which can be only believed but cannot be explained. Hence the necessity of obedience. Hence the angry reaction of your elders if you disobey. It was a problem for me also in my childhood. My whole family was going to the temple. And I was resistant. I was willing if they could explain what this whole thing is all about. They had no explanation, except that it has been done always, and it is good. To follow your elders, to follow your old generations, to follow the ancient heritage, it is good. This is not explanation. I told them I am not asking whether it is good or bad. I am asking what it is. I don't see any God. I see only a stone statue, And you know perfectly well that it is a stone statue. You know better than me because you have purchased it from the market. So God is being sold in the market. You have installed it by your own hands in the temple. At what point it became God? Because in the shop of the sculptor, it is not worshipped. People are haggling for its price. Nobody is praying to it. Nobody thinks that these are gods, because there are so many statues. And you can choose according to your liking. You haggled for the price, you purchased the statue, and I have been an observer all the time, waiting to see at what moment the stone statue becomes God. At what moment it is not a commodity to be purchased and sold, but a divinity to be worshipped. They had no explanation. There is no explanation. Because in fact it never became God, it is still a statue. Just it is no more in the shop. It is in the temple. And what the temple is, another house. I was asking them that I want to participate with you in your prayers, in your worship. I don't want to remain an outsider. But I cannot do it against myself. First I have to be satisfied. And you don't give any answer that is satisfying. And what you are saying in your prayers, give us this, give us that. And do you see the whole hilarious scene? You have purchased a stone statue, installed in a house, and now you are begging from the statue, which is purchased by you, that give us this, give us that, prosperity to our family, health to our family. You are behaving very strangely, in a weird way. And I cannot participate in it. I don't want to disobey. For disobedience sake. And this is not disobedience. I am ready to follow your orders. You are not ready to give it to me. You never asked your own parents. They lived in ignorance and you are living in ignorance. And you want me also to live in ignorance. They thought that I will cool down by and by. They used to take me to the temple. They will all bow down. I will stand by the side. And my father will say to me that just for our sake, it doesn't look good, it looks odd that you stand by the corner when everybody is bound down with so much religiousness. I said, I don't see any religiousness. I simply see a certain kind of exercise. And if these people are so much interested in exercise, they can go to a gymnasium which will really give them health. Here they are asking, give us health and give us wealth. Go to the gymnasium and there you will get health and you will have real exercises. This is not much. And you are right that it looks odd. Not my standing here, but you all doing all kinds of stupid rituals. You are odd. I may be in minority, but I am not odd. And you say, for your sake, I should participate. Why you are not participating with me for my sake? You all should stand in a line in the corner. That will show that you really want to participate. Finally, he told me that it is better you don't come to the temple, because other people come, they see you, and you are always doing something nasty. I said, what? Because I was always sitting with my back towards the God, which is not allowed. That is nasty. I said, if the God is omnipotent, He can change His position. Why should I be bothered about it? But He goes on sitting in the same position. If He does not want to see my back, He can move. He can start looking at the other side. I am more alive than your God. That's why you tell me to change my position. You don't tell your God. You know that He is dead. And they will say, don't say such things. I said, what can I do? He does not breathe. He does not speak. And I don't think he hears. Because a man who is not breathing, who is not seeing, who cannot move, cannot hear. All these things happen in an organic unity. And the organism has to be alive. So to whom you are praying? And slowly, slowly, I managed my family to get rid of the temple. It was made by my family, but then they gave it to the community. They stopped going there. I told them, unless you explain me, your going shows that you are not behaving intelligently. So the question is not the story. The story is a simplification of the complicated life situations where explanations have never been given. For thousands of years, man has lived without explanations, has lived in obedience. Has not questioned, has not doubted, has not been skeptical, afraid, because these are all sins. Obedience is virtue. To me, obedience is not virtue. Intelligence is virtue. And if you follow something because it appeals to your intelligence, it becomes virtuous. And if you don't follow something because your intelligence is against it, it has not to be condemned as sin. The mind of man for centuries has been conditioned to obey. I want a society where we will drop all those things which cannot be explained. Then only obedience can be dropped. I have not removed God without any reason. It is all a connected whole. If God is not removed, obedience remains religion. Then religion never becomes a scientific approach towards your own interiority. anything that cannot be explained should not be ordered. Those things should be taken out of human mind. But then what remains of your religion? God disappears. Hell and heaven disappears. Mahavira believed in 3 hells. Because people are committing sins in different categories. Naturally, to put all of them in one hell and punish them in the same way is illogical. He was a man of logic. He was very mathematical. You will be surprised to know that before 25 centuries, he has told everything about theory of relativity that Einstein discovered in this century. Of course, not in so minute detail, because he had no way to experiment. It was just his vision. So he has 3 hells. Christianity has only one. Mohammedanism has only one. Judaism has only one. Why Mahavira insists for 3? Because he can see that that is unjustified. Somebody has committed a small sin and somebody has killed many people, murdered, raped, and somebody has simply stolen a little money from somebody else. Now, putting them together into the same punishment is illogical. So he has 3 categories. In the first will be the light sinners, the people who have been smoking and drinking tea and coffee and eating ice cream, etc. are not doing very great sins. So just the first hell will be for them, just to give them a little torture. Not to give them their ice cream will be enough. To put them in hellfire seems too much. In the second will be heavier sinners, and in the third will be the most heavy ones, the greatest sinners. But it is not so easy to categorize in 3. And Buddha has 7 hells. Because he sees that in 3 you cannot be still fair. Because there are so many kinds of people and so many kinds of sin that a little more scope is needed to be fair. He has 7 hells. But nobody has any explanation. Nobody can prove the existence. It is just hypothetical. And there was a man, Sanjay Belatthiputta, who was also a great teacher, contemporary to Buddha and Mahavira. He has 700 hells, because he says these people don't understand the complexity. And I think he is right. As far as complexity is concerned, even 700 hells may not be enough. You may have to find a hell for everyone, for every single sinner, because 2 sinners cannot be put together. It will be unfair to this or to that. There is no criterion, no weighing machine that you can decide how much sin you have done, how many kilos. But all hypothetical. And whom to listen? And all the 3 persons are great teachers, great masters. But what they are saying, although it seems to be reasonable, but it is still hypothetical. Somebody may come and may talk about 7,000. And you cannot refute them, and you cannot prove them. Once you ask explanation for everything, your religions will start withering away. Your political ideologies will be found based on nonsense. For example, communism is based on the equality of man, and there are not 2 men who are equal or has ever been equal. It is psychological nonsense to talk of the equality of man. Each individual is unique. There is no question of comparison. All that is filled in your mind, if you take it item by item and try to find out evidence, proof, explanation, you will be surprised that you are carrying unnecessary load. Yes, there are things which cannot be explained, but still they are true. But they are not to be ordered either. They have to be learned in a deep, loving atmosphere. If you trust a master, if you love a master, if you can feel his authenticity, sincerity, his humanness, then perhaps he can talk about things which are, but can only be experienced, cannot be explained. But such a man will not order you to believe them. For example, I cannot tell you to believe in reincarnation, although I know it is a truth. But because I cannot prove it, I cannot ask you to believe in it. I can only ask you to explore, to go deeper into your meditation, to go deeper into your own being, so that you can reach when you were born, and a still little deeper, so that you can feel that you are in your mother's womb. You have been in your mother's womb, and the memory of it is carried by you. Go farther back, and you can see the moment in which you were conceived. The moment when your father and mother provided the opportunity for your soul to enter into a body. Go a little more, and you can see yourself dying, your past lives, and you can move into few lives backwards, but that will be your experience. Still you cannot explain to anybody else, and you cannot insist that they should believe your experience. You may be hallucinating. It may be an illusion. It may be a dream. It is not, because they have different definitions. You cannot repeat a dream. Have you thought about it? You see a dream, and tomorrow you want to repeat it. Can you repeat it? It is beyond you. It may come sometime, but you cannot repeat it. But going into your past life, you can repeat. It is within your hands. It is not a dream. A hallucination needs unconsciousness. A state of druggedness. In meditation, you are not unconscious, you are conscious, more conscious than ever. Hence your experience of past lives cannot be an hallucination. But these are your inner experiences and they remain individual. There are things which cannot be explained, but they are there. But they need not be ordered either. They have also been ordered. To be a Hindu, you have to believe in reincarnation. But the person who believes in reincarnation knows nothing about it. And every belief dulls your intelligence. So it is right that Mullah Nasruddin's father could have explained to the son rather than ordering him. But he is ordering because the story would have lost all meaning. The story is a Sufi story. It has a certain purpose. If the father had explained and Mullah Nasruddin had followed the explanation, what a story will be there? The story is there to indicate something about human beliefs, which can only be ordered, which can only be obeyed, which cannot be explained. And if the younger generation wants to get rid of them, the only way is to disobey everything that does not convince them. Disobedience is an art. It is not against anybody, and it is not something hard. You can be very polite, you can be really nice and yet disobedient. It looks difficult because we have become accustomed of the association that the disobedient person is a hard person. That he is not gentle, that he is not nice. That is the wrong association. I have disobeyed my whole life, my parents, my teachers, my elders, but I have never let them feel that I am in any way disrespectful to them. or I am being nasty to them. Disobedience is a greater art than obedience. Obedience needs no art. One of my professors Professor S.S. Rai, was in deep love with me. So much so that at times he will say, "Okay, so you come here near the board and you explain to the class if you feel my explanation is not enough or is not adequate." And he will go and sit in my place and I will stand in his place and teach the class. I asked him again and again that, "Do you feel that I am disrespectful to you?" He said, "Never. Don't be worried about it." He was very much concerned that I go to the examination hall. Because he knew it perfectly well that I am not interested in examinations or in getting degrees or anything. I am in the university to sharpen my intelligence, not to get a certificate. So he will come to my room, take me in his car to the examination hall, see with his own eyes that I have entered into the hall, and then he will leave. I told him the first day, that I have not prepared at all about this subject, and I am going to be absolutely original, because any answer that I am going to give will not be found in any book. He said, "My God, why did not you say to me? Because this paper I have set. Don't be worried, there is still time." And he took out from his notebook and gave me 5 questions and told me, sitting in the car, answers to each in short. He said, "I am giving you just the essential answers, then you can elaborate." When he was finished, I told him, "Don't feel hurt. I will not use a single sentence of what you have told me, because it is unfair. You have set the paper. You should not let me know. You have created more difficulty for me." Now I will have to avoid everything that you have said. He said, you are strange. I said, I am not strange. I am simply saying that you have done wrong. Now please don't force me to do wrong. And it was a difficult paper because he has given me the questions, he has given me the answers, and I had to avoid his answers. But it was a great exercise to find my own answers absolutely clean, unpolluted. And he was also the examiner of that paper. So as the paper reached to him and he saw, he could not believe his eyes that I had really avoided everything that he has said. I have not even used any word. He called me and said, I am sorry that I have put you into such a trouble. I can see that how difficult it would have been for you to avoid all the right answers and yet remain right. But you did well. And I am giving you 99% marks. I wanted to give you 100%. But that will look a little too much. So I have cut 1 mark. But to you I can say that that was my desire to give you 100% marks. For the simple reason that you have been able to avoid all the real answers and yet you have managed to answer my questions relevantly. And these answers cannot be found in any textbook. It must have been a strain on you. I said, no, it has not been. It has been just a play, just an exercise. Still he asked, why you did not listen to me? That was the easiest thing. I said, you know. That I cannot do anything which is unfair. No other student knows it. Now these 99% are my own earning. If I had repeated your answers, I would have felt always guilty that I was part of some unfair process. But don't feel hurt. I have not rejected your answers for any other reason. You can be disobedient with great artfulness. In fact, you will have to learn much artfulness to be disobedient. So anything that has no explanation and is being forced on you, it is good to say no. But there will come a moment in your life when you are close to a mystic, then don't ask for explanations, because he is not ordering you to believe anything or disbelieve anything. He is simply opening his heart to you. He is not asking for any response from you. So the question of obedience and disobedience does not arise. Don't ask explanations from him. Ask how to experience what you are saying. So there is a world of explanations which is mundane, and there is a world of experience which is really the very truth, the very essence of life, and the very foundation of existence.
Are we really looking for the answers to our numerous questions? Perhaps for each of us there is one question that characterizes us. If we could find it, that question would be enough in itself, with no need for an answer.
In fact, there is no question. Which will be an answer to you. The reality is unquestionably here. All your questions are not really in search of answers. But they can put you in great trouble. If the man you are asking the question is a scholar, a pedagogue, then he can give you an answer which will create thousands of questions. You had come only with one question, he has given one answer. Now that answer creates thousands of questions. And that's how it has been going on in philosophy, in theology. Each question leads to an answer, and that the answer leads to many questions. And this goes on growing. In fact, if the man you are asking knows, then he is not answering your question, he is destroying it. He is trying you to get rid of it. He is not putting an answer in its place, because then that will torture you. This is the real work of a master, a mystic, that sooner or later the people who are with him start feeling questionless. To be questionless is the answer. There is no answer. It is not that when you are questionless, all your questions have been demolished. It is not that you come upon a hidden answer. No, there is nothing hidden. All the rubbish has been removed. You feel just a clean and clear consciousness. And this is the answer. Not the answer to any question. But the state of no question is the answer that we are seeking and searching. Every question is a burden. Every question is a wound. Every question is a tension. And to be questionless, to be completely free of all questions, there is a story in the life of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi. He is working with his disciples in the desert in a small monastery. Few travelers passing by just out of curiosity stopped and went in, and they saw that in the courtyard the students are sitting, the disciples are sitting, and Mevlana means the beloved master. Mevlana Rumi is answering them. They got fed up because of strange questions and strange answers. They went on their way. After years of traveling, they came back, stopped again to see what is happening. only Mevlana Rumi was sitting there, and there was no disciple. They were really shocked. What happened? They went to Mevlana and they said, what happened? And Mevlana laughed. He said, this is my whole work. I crushed all their questions, and now they had no questions. So I have told them to go and do the same to others. Crush their questions. And if you find somebody you cannot manage, send him here. When all questions are removed, you are again a child, utterly innocent. Then your mind is bound to be silent, and there is no possibility of it getting disturbed. And a great serenity. This is the answer. There are no words in it. And it is not relevant to any question in particular. It is only a state of silence.